Light a campfire and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
My name is Kasia and I'm back again with Toby Sinclair from And Beyond Asia. Today we'll be talking about Toby's many years of experience in filming wildlife documentaries, particularly focusing on tigers and the other wildlife of India. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you for having me back. It's a great privilege.
It's such a pleasure. You've got a really, really impressive list of tiger documentaries that actually wildlife and cultural documentaries that you've worked on. I think, just having glanced at it, must be almost 100 different productions for the likes of, BBC, National Geographic, and Animal Planet. How did this all start? How, when, and where did you first start to become involved in filming with wildlife?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, in our earlier conversation, I was able to share, or I was sort of paying guests in a house in Kathmandu, owned by or leased by someone called Dieter Plager, who was a cameraman with Survival Anglia in the UK. Having worked in Africa for years, he moved to Asia to film tigers. So I was with him in the late 70s, and I learned a lot, sort of sharing, just over the dinner table or watching his films. In those days, 16 millimeters, we had an old projector, and we showed ourselves his old films, and he had a trunk load of them. And through him, I met people like Alan Root, who, of course, is legendary in East Africa. And then I moved down to Delhi, and Dieter asked me to help with get some permissions for a couple of films, which I did. But my real introduction to filmmaking with wildlife didn't happen until the early 90s. So a good 10, 12 years after my time with Dieter, when I was initially asked to help a friend called Mark Shand make a film called Travels with My Elephant. So I helped with sort of getting permissions and suggestions about where they went. And this was very much a sort of part-time helping a friend out. And then someone else contacted me for some information for a program they were making called Tiger Crisis. It was about 1992, 93, and that was being made for the BBC. And this was when in 92, we realized that tiger numbers were dropping in various places. There were lots of poaching incidents. And I was on a committee advisory committee to something called the Bombay Natural History Society, which is still the leading, it's a very old society, and still the leading non-government scientific body for natural history in India, or really in South Asia. It goes back to the 1880s. And so I was approached to help and give ideas and give stories and whatever. And from that, I was approached by the producer, Mike Burkhead, who had a project in hand to make a series to celebrate 50 years of India's independence. So that would have come up in 1997, 50 years after independence in 47, which he was going to call The Land of the Tiger. And this was a review, sort of overview of the wildlife of the Indian subcontinent. So we filmed in Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and also in Pakistan. So we filmed bears on the plateau and markhor, for instance, on the plateau of the Karakoram in Pakistan. So we were, and I was sort of approached because I had three strings to my bow in those days. I had a passion and interest in Indian wildlife. I'd written a book about Indian wildlife, which had been published a few years earlier, together with a couple of colleagues. I was working for a travel company, and I understood logistics. And I had a little knowledge about sort of film, but not much. So I was asked to help. And that became a 3-year employment for the BBC directly. I was employed by them. We made 6 one-hour programs, which was broadcast around the world in 97. We looked at the mountains, we looked at the rivers, we looked at the seas and the islands, we looked at the forests, we looked at the deserts, and it's sort of 6 themes. And since then, it was 95 when I started. Since then, for the next 25 years, I had permanent work, making, helping, assisting, researching, getting the permissions, handling the logistics for a series of films across South Asia.
So was that series basically the sort of the factor that turned it around from just being into an interest that you dabbled in into something that you actually did on a professional basis for a number of years? Was that where the change came?
Yes, I from suddenly sort of helping people on films, moonlighting from my whatever else I was supposed to be doing at that time, to working really 24/7, 365 days of the year for 3 years, making Land of the Tiger, and it was a phenomenal challenge. I had a young assistant with me, who very brave, who had also worked for Tiger Tops, but 10, 12 years later than I am. And he
Mm-hmm.
came up to me one day and introduced himself and said he would, and I rather took to him and thought this guy's interesting. And I asked him to be my assistant. And that was Sohail Gupta, who is today the managing director of And Beyond Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I wasn't responsible for him getting that post, but he and I have worked together for the last 25 years, and he is patient enough to still tolerate me and still work with me. But that and we have a great respect and friendship for each other. But so Suhail was part of this journey in the early days.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I stayed with films. He sort of concentrated on responsible tourism.
Mm.
From Land of the Tiger, working with the producer Mike Burkett, and then we had different program producers and different cameramen, and then there's a network of people you would meet. I kept at least twice a year. I'd go back to Bristol in the UK and would meet people, and then they would suddenly contact me and say, "Listen, we're thinking of doing a shoot in India. Can you help?" And that just snowballed one into the other. I mean, at the end of making Land of the Tiger, I was asked to do the Indian sequences for a David Attenborough series called The Life of Birds, which is
Yes.
one less well known, perhaps, but as a sort of very amateur bird watcher, it was one that I was fascinated by. And this is a shoot for rufous woodpeckers in the forests of southwest India, and how they make their nest in ants' nests. And it was a great privilege. Unfortunately, David didn't come on that shoot, but I had actually met him earlier when he was doing Living Planet, and they were filming in India. So from that, it snowballed, and from the Land of the Tiger, we made a 1 hour tiger film for BBC and National Geographic, which went out in '99. As a big sort of wildlife film of the spring in both America and UK. And there was another spin-off out of the Tiger film, which was a 30-minute film for BBC on wild dogs, the dole, called The Wild Bunch. And so there's always one thing leads into another.
Yes. And Toby, when you speak about working on the movies and the work that you did, um, what exactly did that involve? Obviously you've spoken about having the background in travel, so you would have consulted on that, and you spoke about logistics and permits. But what would a typical production involve you actually doing?
It In those days, it was much more collaborative. Someone would have an idea. They would perhaps ring me up, send me an email. Toby, we're thinking of coming to film in India. Uh, this is the theme of what we're doing. What do you suggest?
Yes.
Uh, and then there were other occasions when uh, someone would just contact me and say, we need a sequence of, I don't know, relationship between people and antelopes in the deserts of Rajasthan for an anthropological film. So sometimes it was organizing sequences. So I would have to uh, sometimes come up with the ideas, what we could film, where we could film it. I mean, when Planet Earth was being made, and this was jumping ahead a few years, uh, I heard, I mean, they contacted me and said, Toby, we've really got to make sure that India gets its fair share in Planet Earth. What are the stories that you think are happening now? What have we got? We have a theme on grasslands, or we have a theme on mountains, on rivers. So what are we? Can we film? So together with the producers, we would brainstorm and say, well, perhaps we could film pygmy hogs in the grasslands of Kaziranga and Assam, which is a major conservation project. But pygmy hogs are a small species that live within the same landscape as wild elephants and rhinoceroses. So that the focus may be pygmy hogs telling that story, but actually you're showing so much more. Um, and for David Attenborough's Life of Mammals, and we managed to get David to India for that program, and we did 9 sequences in different parts of the country with him. So my job, to go back to, sometimes involved coming up with ideas, but more often it was turning someone else's ideas into of something we could actually film and do, and decide or recommend where we might do it, because there could be alternative sites, and who could be the local scientist, local specialist, the local advisor on the project, and then help prepare the applications, which would go through various Government of India departments and follow those through, get the local permits, and plan and execute the logistics of the shoot. And when we had presenter-led programs, which a lot of the programs didn't involve presenters, it was pure blue chip natural history, which with a voiceover. But sometimes we needed to babysit the presenters, or just or keep them occupied, or keep them away from the day-to-day work that the cameraman and the sound man and the producer were doing in the field. So I had that sort of job. It was a bit of a so it was fascinating. It was I never saw it as being nursemaiding, because I wasn't. It was just listening, talking, learning from these extraordinary people, and many of them were extraordinary people. And last but by no means least, because I have a fixation on good coffee, I always took on the responsibility for making sure that the coffee was drinkable and good, and the beer was cold. Without that, a camera crew will not operate properly.
Toby, you mentioned Suhail a couple of minutes ago, and you spoke a little bit about responsible tourism, and beyond, and the fact that Suhail now works more on that side of things. But in fact, there is quite a bit of a link between the nature documentaries that you worked for and the concept of responsible tourism. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Suhail joined me as sort of my assistant, really, handling the travel side of the logistics that we on the various film projects on Land of the Tiger, and then he later joined became a field assistant with one of the cameramen when we made the National Geographic BBC Tiger special, and he spent many months in the field working daily with the cameraman. So this gave us both a huge amount of knowledge of how you can operate in wilderness areas within India, how you can deal with park officials, and how you could run a camp on the outside of one of these parks. And Suhail was always very keen to run a responsible lodge, and successfully did so. He's helped with a friend of his and his wife Rini. They set up a lodge in Panna, in Pench National Park, uh, in southern Madhya Pradesh, called Bhagwan, and it really was a good example of responsible tourism. And a lot of the knowledge that went into it and the experiences that the lodge did came from what he had learnt, both at Tiger Tops as to how we could do it, but also working with films to realize what you can show to guests and what you don't have to do. It's not a circus. You can share genuine wildlife experience. It's not a package in the sense of it being manufactured. And we both felt and still feel that certain terms like ecotourism and eco-lodges are appallingly misused and really have no linkage to the parks which host them. And they often don't make a connection to the landscape that hosts these lodges. But responsible tourism is something that you can do and practice, hopefully, anywhere in your work. And as a company and beyond in Asia, in India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, we try and follow these responsible practices at all times. And if someone comes to us or contacts us and says, we're opening a new eco lodge outside so and so national park, we shudder because when they use that term, we know they're probably going to have a discotheque on New Year's Eve, or they're probably going to have spotlights, or they're going to have barbecues and dancing every Saturday. And they're going to burn up far too much energy and do very, very little for the host community. So we have become instinctively skeptical about people coming to us with a new product. But the great thing is, once in a while, there's a surprise. And there is someone who we believe is really doing something good, really doing something we can work with honestly and and meet the same aims as we have for responsible tourism.
That's always quite a pleasure, isn't it?
It's a privilege because you think, you know, there are people, and the nice thing is, if you've been in it as long as I have, which is now over 40 years in India, people come and they've heard about something that you've done, and they use that as a benchmark, and it's very flattering. But I won't talk about that too much. But you asked about films and how they link to it. What making these films has given us, both Sohail and myself, and I'm the one who's now in the field. I'm the one who goes off and has the fun, uh, not just city and government offices trying to get permits, which is a hell of a job, but actually being in the field when shooting is going on, setting up the shoots, making sure the local field assistant who's going to do it, is that I have been to almost every corner of India, which is a huge, massive land. It's as diverse and as vast as Europe is, from sort of, I keep saying, from Finland to Portugal, from Ireland to Greece. India is as diverse in terms of language, landscapes, and the wildlife that lives within those landscapes. So these have been, and from those trips and the logistics that I've had to put together for those trips, like filming in Nagaland up on the Burma border, or filming in the Andaman Islands off in the on the eastern side of the Bay of Bengal, that has given us as an office, because I use all this is done through the And Beyond office in New Delhi, as a team, we have built up logistical knowledge. So we can then handle this for guests. We can organize off the beaten track programs for people, well away from the sort of, I mean, the cliched destinations are important. I mean, a cliche is something that works and something that has value, but is often repeated. So we've been able to do that, handle those works, those places differently, but also look at other obscure parts of the country and share those with and beyond guests from around the world, and do so as responsibly as possible. So films have given us a knowledge base, uh, uh, experiences, and accesses that we wouldn't have normally had if we just worked for a, a travel company in downtown Delhi.
Yeah. And just and in terms of raising awareness, not only about what India has to offer, but um, about how people can access it responsibly and with a view towards the environment. Do you find that the documentaries that you've worked on have raised awareness, or that people sort of refer back to them when they're thinking about traveling to Asia?
I think the film, certainly in the early years of my time working on them, by which I really mean most of the previous first 20 years, we we were making films which captured the splendor, the variety, and the beauty, and in a few cases, the problems that wildlife experienced. We would also look at we looked at issues, but we weren't offering solutions, and we weren't. Um, there was a certain how to describe it. Excuse my hesitation. Um, we wanted to picture natural history in exclusion of what was going on around it. So we would look at a tiger hunting, or with cubs, or wild dogs hunting, or dolphins in the Ganges River, or lorises in the forests of South India, in isolation of what was going on around them, in a way. That all changed, and the big change, I think, in wildlife documentaries worldwide happened quite recently with Blue Planet 2, that David Attenborough sort of did an episode which really dealt with plastics in the ocean. Uh, and that had a huge impact on governments around the world, most noticeably, actually, with the British government. Within 6 weeks of that program being broadcast in the UK on BBC, the finance minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, introduced a new bill in Parliament controlling the use of plastics and the whole chain of plastic waste going into the oceans. So within 6 weeks of a television documentary, a law had been tabled in Parliament in a major economy. And that shows you the power that a sort of targeted documentary can have. And that was very unusual, but I think it made a difference. There's also a lovely Indian example, which sadly I wasn't involved with, but a friend of mine was asked by tiger scientists to make a short documentary about the importance of a small tiger reserve in the Western Ghats of southern India, the mountains of southern India, which was being impacted by a huge, very well-funded iron ore mine and a steel plant which was adjacent to it. And there'd been a case going on in the Supreme Court of India for 15 to 20 years, going back and forth with NGOs trying to close down this plant and control it, and of course the government and the economists saying, no, this is far too important, there are too many people at work, billions of dollars have been invested in this, and it generates X amount for annually in exports, etc., etc. So this small film, 12 minutes, was made. And the NGO that funded it added it to its evidence and begged the time and the patience of the justices to watch it as a 12. They went to their chambers, watched a 12-minute film and within 24 hours closed down a multi-billion-dollar power, iron ore mine and mill, and then the consequent pollution of a river that flowed with pink water through a tiger reserve. So a 12-minute film tilted the justices who had been discussing something for over 15 years. And so it can work if you're lucky and if you do something really clever. As I say, it was made by a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, a cameraman from Madras called Shekhar Dattatri. And he deserves, he should have got a Nobel Prize for doing that.
Yeah, that's the impact is huge. Um, and in terms of raising awareness in people's minds about the wildlife experiences that India has to offer, I mean, I think from very many years, when people spoke about safari or about wildlife, what automatically sprang to mind was pretty much always Africa. Do you feel that documentaries like the ones that you've worked on have played a role in almost educating people about the amount of wildlife and safari experiences that India's got to offer?
Yes, I do. I mean, in the early noughties, sort of the beginning of this century, the BBC did annual surveys, and so did Discovery, and I think National Geographic, about the subjects that people like to watch most. Uh, the BBC found in 9 out of 10 years that tigers were top of their list. Discovery and National Geographic, it was a sort of toss-up between tigers and sharks
Okay.
as to what people like. I mean, I think the Americans like killing more than raw, whereas the British television documentaries have a lot of sex. So sort of there is a difference in the audience lately. I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to what it means. But so tigers were getting these hits. So I ended up making, I don't know, I've never counted them up actually, 10 or 11 tiger documentaries over a period of 15 to 20 years for the BBC alone.
Hmm.
I worked on other films for National Geographic, for French television, German television, uh, something for PBS, and then issue programs about tigers for uh, ABC and 60 Minutes, the American news channel. So there's constant demand for those sort of programs, and they really wanted pretty pictures. Uh, they don't want, they didn't want issues too much certainly not in the early days. Um, Although we always tried to bring it in, but in the end, they wanted the perfection, these wonderful animals in a wonderful landscape. So these films, very, very few tiger films were shown on television uh, prior to 1990. Filming in India was difficult. Dita Plaga was an exception who made two films in the 80s, partly in India, partly in Nepal. But today, I mean, I have three possible tiger films in different stages of discussion as we speak today in 2020. And we're looking at filming in the post-COVID world. There's an ongoing film that I've been involved with for Disney Nature on tigers that should be brought. They haven't quite finished filming and they have to stop because of the lockdowns. But that is be released on Earth Day in April 2021 for cinema release around the world. And those films sort of take 3 years to make.
Yeah, so that's not much time left.
So we don't have a lot of time. We've lost a very important period between the sort of spring and summer prior to the monsoon this year. And let's see what happens. We don't know. Um, That's a film that I helped with because it's run by because the producers are very good close friends of mine. Um, but as a company, we weren't involved in the logistics for it. But there are others that we have been involved over the years, and not only tigers. I mean, I remember making a film which is one of my favorites. It was made over a period of a year, called The Desert Wolves of India. Uh, it was a fascinating project. We made a film about the Asiatic wild dogs, which was a spin off from tigers. Films on rhinos. Um, worked on 3 films on snow leopards over the years, and then on themes like the monsoon. I did a series called Wild Asia. I helped actually the same cameraman who made the film about the Arno mine made a film on the monsoon. So I did all the permits and helped him with some of the logistics. But I wasn't in, and that film I wasn't involved with the field, be going out into the field at all. So some I have more involvement than others, but they're always I always learn, and whenever you're in a national park, even if you go, whether you go as a tourist or as a documentary filmmaker or part of a documentary film team, to be more exact, um, you always see something new, whether it's a bit of tiger behavior or just an infestation of cicadas making an awful lot of noise, and you suddenly realize this noise is slightly different. Is it a different species? And then you go looking for cicadas, which are incredibly difficult things to find sometimes. Uh, or you see some herb, amphibians, frogs, toads. So there's different dimensions to the forest. There's different to the landscape, and that's what I really enjoy. I love.
Well, Toby, with 25 years spent working on nature documentaries, you must have had some absolutely memorable moments. What are some of your favorite ones?
Oh, that's a I should have anticipated that sort of question. Um, I think in many ways it's the people I've met and worked with. It may sound odd. Making wildlife films, you're out in the bush, you have a lot of solitude, you have a lot of time to think, but you also meet extraordinary people. The scientists, I mean, in India, conservationists like Ullas Karant, who's probably India's leading tiger scientist, along with Raghu Chandavat, with whom I helped make a film called Tigers at the Emerald Forest. Um, when was that? 2003. Working with Valmik Topper, who's one of India's leading conservationists, who really have these people really have made a difference. They have put the brakes on absurd government policies. And with Valmik, I've traveled the length and breadth of India when we were making Land of the Tiger, which was a series that he presented. And then people from further afield. I mean, working with George Schaller, who is, the greatest wildlife biologist, um, who'd worked on gorillas, worked on lions in the Serengeti, worked on tigers in the early 60s, and then spent the next 30 years in the Himalaya looking at goats and sheep, and took the first decent photograph of a snow leopard in the wild, and then worked on the Tibetan plateau for 20 years. I mean, he's an amazing man. But to go back to Kana with him for 5 days when they were making a documentary about his life, uh, and be in the, and I was doing this maybe 2008, and being with this great man whose book I had read 40 years earlier, who had worked in Kana in the early 60s and wrote The Deer and the Tiger, which is today the benchmark for all wildlife studies in South Asia. That was a huge experience. And then, of course, meeting and getting to know and working with someone like Sir David Attenborough, uh, listening to his stories, um, listening to his jokes, which are sometimes, and learning from him and his reminiscences, and seeing how extraordinarily professionally he works. And he's one of those rare people that you see him on television and you know he's nice. But when you meet him in reality, he's even nicer. And I've been lucky enough to do a couple of documentary series shoots with, uh, and Life of Mammals was one of them. When we went to 7 different locations in India, so that is a rare experience. So it's the people you meet, and then the things that you share with them. Out in the Gir forest really early morning to film lions with Valmik Thapa, who was presenting, and we came across some hyenas, and we just stopped and watched hyenas as the sun was coming up in the early morning. Because in India, you don't often see hyenas in daytime. You see them on forest roads at night. But that was a huge experience. Going out into the Ganges River looking for dolphin sites, so we could film David Attenborough with a dolphin in the water behind. And the Ganges is murky, and these dolphins are blind, and it's quite obviously difficult to predict. I was lucky. I recce'd 3 places, narrowed down 2, and the team decided that we go to 1. And we did manage to get a film of David talking to camera and a dolphin coming out of the water behind. So those are right on cue. It's amazing what you do. You throw a few ham sandwiches into the water, but we don't do anything like that. I should
I'm sure.
stress we don't. But I mean, it was serendipity. It was just a magical, magical moment, and the smile on the cameraman's face, the producer's even bigger smile, and I just felt, it was a very, very special moment.
Mhm. So, it's obvious that, while you might have started off with a lot of tiger work there, I'm glad you've brought in all the other species that you've worked with as well. But in addition to India, where else have you filmed with wildlife or nature documentaries in general?
Well, in Nepal, I've filmed both sequences for films on Buddhism, actually, documentaries on Buddhism, because the Buddha was born at a place called Lumbini, which is very close to Chitwan National Park, where I started my working life in the 70s. And I've been back to Chitwan a couple of times for documentaries, once for just National Geographic Wild. It was about tigers and conflict with humans. Um, and once to Bardia for a film, it was a very small film for an American company, which is the Bardia National Park in western Nepal, a beautiful, beautiful bit of forest. I filmed in Bangladesh, filming tigers in the Sundarbans, which are the world's largest mangrove forests. 2/3 of them are within Bangladesh. 1/3 is in the Indian state of West Bengal, where Calcutta is. And these mangrove forests protect the Ganges Delta and sort of soften the blows of cyclones as they occasionally blow up the Bay of Bengal. And in those forests, unlike anything else I've been to in India, you know that if you see tiger pug marks, they're going to be less than 12 years or 12 days. What am I talking about? Sorry, I'll start again. You know that if you're going to see tiger pug marks, they're going to be less than 12 hours old because of the tides. The tides come twice a day, and so they'll wash away. And then go into these little creeks on a little small boat, get out, and you walk through this incredibly cloyy, clinging mud. And really, the only way to walk is barefoot. And if you come across a fresh tiger pug mark, you assume that tiger is probably not that far away because although the tiger is a lot stronger than you are, even or she is not going to walk very far in that habitat. And if you know that he or she has been there within the previous 12 hours or less, you begin to sort of sense things that we probably should be sensing. And the hairs in the back of the neck go up. It's very exciting, very thrilling. And when you do see a tiger in the Sundarbans, it's magical. I don't know how, I must have been there 9 or 10 times in 20 years. I don't go there, it's not a place I go to very often. And I've had wonderful days there. I remember one day seeing 7 different species of kingfisher. It's that sort of habit, and that was magical. But I also remember the first time I saw a tiger swimming across a creek. And tigers are good swimmers. They, they've been seen 8 miles out to sea, which means that tiger will have to swim 16 miles because he's got to get there and get back to wherever he's going to. So to see a tiger swimming across a creek that is a mile wide, then just getting out onto the mud bank and disappearing within seconds into the forest is very, very special. I have to say I've only seen that actual scene once, but my God, it was a magical moment. You asked earlier, actually, it reminds me of something else. You asked me earlier about what are the great moments watching animals, watching tigers. And we were once filming in Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan, which is a park that And Beyond Asia takes its guests to quite often. We have some very wonderful, wonderful sightings and experiences there. On one occasion, we were filming, and the cameraman was filming a tiger kill, tiger on a kill, eating an antelope, a big Indian nilgai, nubull. And I was in a second vehicle, about 50 yards behind, keeping quiet and just watching what was going on. I think I'd gone to collect some extra equipment. And then the cameraman stopped what he was doing and he wanted to reposition his vehicle ahead of me. And he all had sign language. He sort of got my attention, said that he was going to move. And I put my hands up saying, no, stop, stop, stop. And he looked quizzically why. And I pointed down to the back of his vehicle where his rear wheel was. So just 2 or 3 feet from where he had been working. And the tigress that had been on the kill had 2 cubs with her. And those cubs had wandered down during the course of his filming and lay down on the ground beside the vehicle that Colin was in, the cameraman was in, and one of them was leaning against the back wheel.
Oh, wow.
I just had to say, and so I pointed to his back wheel, and he thought he had a puncher. So he just looked over, and his face was, I don't know, 2.5 feet, 3 feet from a tiger lying on the ground. And I've never, he jumped back and instinctively. But those are sort of silly little things, but they're memories that I'll never forget of just watching someone hard at work, Colin at work, picking up stuff, but he knew he had to reposition the vehicle to get a different camera angle. But suddenly he couldn't because these cubs were lying down. Yeah. And those are the moments that you sort of, the animal wins, really. You don't really. And the producer gets very angry because you've lost a potential shot. He knows perfectly well why it happened or how it happened. Or you just don't tell the producer, which is actually probably what's wiser thing to do. But in fact, in this instance, the tigress that had been feeding felt that it was time that the cubs came and joined her. So she called the cubs, and the cubs got up and walked around. So as that happened, the camera vehicle repositioned itself only by about 10 yards. And you got a different angle of the cubs walking up to join the mother to feed on the kill. So the producer in the end was happy. And there was a nice sequence. It was for a BBC film called Tiger Paradise. Was it Danger in Tigerland? I think that was, because it was about issues. But it was filmed in Ranthambore.
So as you've already said, wildlife behavior really is unpredictable, and you must have come across a lot of that while filming. Have you ever had any incidents where you kind of, you thought at something, at a situation that was developing, and you were like, well, actually, this could have gone either way?
Yes. Um, we used to strip down the vehicles, so we didn't. The windscreen was pushed down. We didn't, rather like the and beyond safari vehicles, lodges, say Pindar. And, you don't have a door. Um, we take out all the frame at the back, so the cameraman sits in the back, and there were various times that I was driving the cameraman, and on one occasion, again in Ranthambore, we were filming a tigress, and the cameraman, we were on a little track, and the tigress was walking in the bushes just to the side of the road, come out onto the road and go back in. So we wanted to keep our position for that moment. But she kept on walking towards us uh, until she got so close that we couldn't have positioned the vehicle without disturbing the tigress. There's a sort of rule, and it applies anywhere in the world, that if you draw up, if you drive and you try not to enter across a invisible threshold, getting too close to an animal, so you don't disturb it, maybe 25, 30 yards away, meters away. And then what the animal does, be it a tiger or a leopard or a lion in the Gir forests of Gujarat, what the animal does after that, the animal's in control. So
Hmm.
we were parked on the road. This tiger was coming towards us, and we obviously weren't going to be able to move after a certain, not too close, without Cameron kept on filming, and the tigress kept on walking, and she walked towards us, and then I lost sight of her because I couldn't see at the very front of the vehicle, and then she came along the side where I was sitting. Right, bear in mind, I had a camera in my lap, my still camera in my lap, and this tigress just walked past the vehicle, not more than 2 feet from the side of the vehicle, and then came and hesitated when she came to me. And so the tiger's head and my head were can't be more than 3 feet apart. And I was sitting still. The cameraman stopped filming. None of us moved. I don't think any of us breathed. I just held my camera in my lap. And the tiger hesitated for a moment and then just carried on and walked past us. And we just let out a deep, deep breath. Um, so I wasn't threatened, but I was afraid. And for that moment, I was very nervous because you didn't know what was going to happen next. But
Mm.
there's never been a case in Ranthambore, which is a park has lots of tourism, lots of vehicles. Many of them don't behave properly. Many of them, sadly, don't always follow the rules. Although I must say, it's a lot better today than it was 20 years ago. So you're never quite sure what's going to happen next.
Mm.
That was one of those moments.
Yeah, and it's probably a moment that you'll never forget. And it's also one of those things that shows exactly why anything with wildlife, whether it's filming or game drives or whatever you do, is so unpredictable, but also so thrilling at the same time.
Yes, even when I travel to a park today, escorting a group or going as a sort of guest lecturer or just going on my own or with a friend, there's sometimes that because you've been working hard, you're just tired and you sort of feel, oh, I'm going to take this afternoon off. I'm just going to sit and read. But in the end, you go back out into the park because you don't want to miss anything.
That
Um,
is the lure of it. Mm.
and I mean, we all experience that moment. And of course, when you do travel with people and they get tired and they decide I'm not coming out in the park tomorrow morning, you have fun, it's inevitable that you see something that you wished you could have shared with someone else. Um, but I actually find this, nowadays, I don't want to sound blasé because tigers are magnificent. But I do find watching sloth bears, watching wild dogs, the Asiatic wild dog, which is the dog, um, absolutely, I mean, even more fascinating because they're less off the scene than tigers are. It's not that you see a lot of tigers or you see them very often, but these animals are even less frequently seen in these forests. And to see
Hmm.
a honey badger, in 40 years, I've only seen one pangolin in the wild in India. I mean,
Yes.
but I must have spent 4, 5 years of my life of those out of those 40 years in landscapes that would have had pangolins.
Mm. And yet they're just so secretive you don't see them.
Yeah, as I say, I've seen honey badgers or rattle a few times. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a hog badger which I've only seen twice in Assam. That's really only found in one area. So there are some things that you don't see very many hyenas. Caracals in the Indian landscape. I've only ever seen caracals in Ranthambore and one
Hmm.
saw in Gujarat, which was sadly a roadkill. So I knew, that caracals were around, but it was dead. Um, these are, to me, if I saw a caracal, I would, you know, and if I ever managed to get a photograph of one, I would be very, very happy.
Mm. So still plenty of subjects to make documentaries about and new things to discover.
But people still want tigers. That demand has never stopped, never gone down. Um, One of the reasons why I like working on a series or work like Life of Mammals, that or what I did later on working in Sri Lanka. I'll keep that for another day. Is that you can film other species. When we filmed with David Attenborough for Life of Mammals, we filmed lorises in the forests of southern India. We filmed rats in urban communities, something that David.
Hmm.
We filmed humans because the largest gathering of mammals in the world takes place on the banks of the River Ganges every 12 years at a big festival called the Kumbh Mela. We filmed dolphins in the river. We filmed leopards walking through villages at night in Rajasthan.
Mm.
So these were all unusual things. I mean, the leopards in India, a large number of leopards live and survive in a human landscape, human dominated landscape, where there is not
Mm.
much wild game and not much. So they live off stray dogs, pie dogs, and they live off goats and sheep in agricultural areas. But there is a thriving leopard population, and the local shepherds, in a sense,
Hmm.
see the loss of the occasional goat or the occasional sheep as a sort of tax that they pay to the leopards with whom they share the landscape. So those are the sort of films that I personally really enjoy working on
Mm.
because you're working, you're learning about the depth of a forest. You're learning about the variety of species and how they interconnect. I mean, India has 8 species of deer. It has lions, tigers, leopards, but it also has clouded leopards and then lots of smaller cats, fishing cats, rusty spotted cats, jungle cats. So there's so much to see if you're lucky. Um, and I have been lucky.
That's definitely a lot of amazing subjects. Now, Toby, just to wrap up, at the beginning we spoke about some of the first films and the first series that you were involved in. Are there any more recent documentaries that you'd like to mention, perhaps for those of our listeners who'd like to look them up and use them for a little bit of travel inspiration while they're still in lockdown?
There was a program a BBC program called Dynasty that was made.
Hmm.
It was a series that was broadcast 2 years ago, and probably with Discovery in the States. I'm not 100% sure who the co-producer was, but it was made by the BBC. Uh, and they looked at 5 species. There's only one in India, which was tiger. Uh, and the tiger, they followed a family of tigers. And that was a really interesting and well-made film. It was filmed in Bandipur Tiger Reserve in central India, park where we spend a lot of time, send a lot of our many guests go there, and they generally get very good sightings. So Dynasty was one. Um, Recently, to be honest, most of my last 6 years, not much of my last 6 years has been spent filming in Sri Lanka, but I'm now back filming in India or working on projects in India. So the Disney Tiger film, which should go out next year, will be worth seeing. It will have the usual Disney commentary, and it will be a feature film. But the footage I've been lucky enough to see some of the rushes, is magnificent. Um, I've got a mental blank, I'm afraid, Cassia. I can't think of it.
That's fine. You've given us plenty of options to look at. Toby, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there for today, and I look forward to having you back to tell us a little bit more about wildlife filming in Sri Lanka.
That would be my pleasure to share that. A wonderful place both to visit and to work. But thank you for giving me the opportunity today to talk about some of the things that I've been privileged to experience, privileged to be involved in over the last 25 years, really.
It's been wonderful to get a glimpse into that life. Thank you again, Toby. Thank you for listening to And Beyond Fireside Chats. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. If you have any comments or feedback, or would like to suggest a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, drop us an email at firesidechats@andbeyond.com. We'd love to hear from you.